In this video, you and I get to take a look at the individual services or components that we can use as part of Identity Services Engine. Let's begin. I'd like you to imagine that you and I have implemented ISE, and it is responsible for the authentication and the authorization of thousands and thousands of users. Now, what happens if that ISE server is no longer available? One of the things we definitely want to implement is some type of fault tolerance. And one of the cool things is that when we implement Identity Services Engine, we don't have to do it on a single node. A node represents a single ISE system. We can take the functionality that's created and provided by ISE and we can split it across multiple devices and have fault tolerance in the process. And the personas, or the responsibility or functions that ISE can provide, include the administration. And administration is all about the system-related configuration, configuring the authentication policies and the authorization policies. So we could have two ISE servers. Let's call it ISE A and ISE B. And maybe ISE A is our primary administration server, and ISE B is the secondary. So the benefit is we still get a single pane of glass where we can manage and configure our policies, and we can go to a single ISE server to implement those policies. And of course, the other option is if we don't have a large environment, if we have a single ISE server, it could also act as a standalone node. And if so, it would have to take on all the responsibility of the administration persona, as well as the others, if we only have a single device to work with. Another persona is the policy service function. So if we had a node that was providing this policy service function, it would be referred to as a PSN, a policy service node. In English, that's simply an ISE server that's providing the policy service functions. And the policy service is all about implementing the policy. With the administration persona, we configured a policy, and with the policy service persona, it's actually implementing that policy. So for example, if we've configured network access policies, posturing, guest access, and so forth, it's the policy service function that's evaluating those policies and making the decisions. And in a large environment, it's very likely we're going to have more than a single node that's implementing the policy service. For two reasons. One, for fault tolerance, and secondly, we might just have too much of a load for a single server to handle all by itself. So in our environment, if we had a user who authenticated using 802.1x, and based on the authorization policy, we're going to change the parameters on that port, the ISE server, when it sends it COA, the change of authorization message, over to the switch regarding that port, that would be an example of a service provided by the policy service node, in this case, this ISE server, that's providing that policy service function. If an ISE node is operating and using the monitoring function, which in a standalone environment we absolutely would, in a distributed environment we might have two ISE nodes that are performing the monitoring function, and that way we could send all of our messages from both the administration and the policy service functions over to a centralized ISE server for the collection and management of all of those log messages. And for fault tolerance, we might have a primary node that's providing the monitoring function as well as a secondary node for the benefit of fault tolerance. That way, if a single server goes down, we can still collect our log messages from the other ISE servers that are operating in our environment. The inline posture persona is that aspect of ISE that is doing the network admissions control. For example, if we're requiring a firewall on the device before allowing it access into our network, or if we're requiring certain versions of antivirus software, or whatever the rules that we set up are, the inline posture persona is that component of ISE that's enforcing those rules. When setting up an ISE deployment where we have multiple nodes involved that may be providing one or more of these functions, here's a few important tips in setting those up. Number one, we'd want to make sure we go to each of those ISE servers and set up the correct NTP information individually on each one of those systems so that as they begin to work together, we'll have consistent time and timestamp information across those systems. We'd also want to make sure that for each of our systems that DNS is correctly set up and that each of the ISE servers, each of the ISE nodes, can be correctly resolved by the other ISE servers. In this video, we've taken a look at the fact that we can have multiple nodes working together in an ISE distributed deployment. And then we can take these services that are traditionally running on a single ISE server and we can distribute them across multiple servers. We've also taken a look at the roles an ISE server may play, whether it be the primary or secondary, or in the case of a single ISE server, a standalone role, in which case it would be providing all of these services from the single standalone server. I have had a great time in this video. I'm so glad you joined me for it. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.